a world that's all about the future, many might think that it's filled with advanced technology and high-tech gadgets. However, as time unfolds, things turn out to be quite the opposite of what you'd expect. In this future era, people with high IQs, the so-called smart ones, have fewer offspring because they tend to see and worry about various societal issues, be it economic problems, the cost of living, or even preparedness for the future. This leads to a decline in their population as they start having fewer children when they genuinely feel ready. Conversely, those with lower IQs tend to live life as they please and rarely think about the future. Consequently, this group tends to have more children, leading to a world filled with less intelligent individuals. Jumping back to the year 2000, we meet Joe, a military officer who is selected for a top-secret experiment. This experiment involves preserving human beings for use in the future. The military is working on a device to preserve human beings for use in the future, and Joe, a regular soldier without a family, is chosen for the test. The reason Joe is chosen for this experiment is his lack of family ties since his parents have passed away, making it easy to keep the project secret in case something goes wrong. Another participant in the experiment is Rita, a young woman who works as a prostitute. Rita agrees to take part in the experiment to reduce her criminal charges. The military reaches out to a man named Agent Upgrade, who is Rita's pimp, to recruit her for the experiment. Before entering the testing facility, Joe and Rita have a brief conversation to get to know each other a little. Once inside the preservation device, Rita becomes nervous and attempts to escape, but Joe reassures her that everything is safe and they will be fine. This experiment will last for a whole year. Shortly after calming Rita down, they begin the experiment. However, not long after starting, the project's overseer, a project leader, is caught attempting to buy sexual services, leading to the destruction of the entire secret military base. Joe and Rita, still inside the preservation device, remain oblivious to these events and have been forgotten by time. While both of them were asleep inside the preservation device for over 500 years, human civilization gradually deteriorated into a crisis. By the year 2005, the world was filled with people who lacked intelligence. These individuals couldn't even solve basic problems like disposing of garbage properly, resulting in massive trash heaps that had piled up for centuries. One day, in the midst of this garbage catastrophe, the gigantic garbage collapsed. A testing device containing Joe was uncovered. This event woke Joe up, leaving him in a state of confusion. He had no idea that over 500 years had passed. Everything had changed so much that Joe was almost incapable of functioning. With little choice, he decided to explore the nearby surroundings. Joe found his way to a hospital, but the conditions of the hospital is no better than the world outside. When he tried to get a drink of water, he was shocked to find that the water coming out of the faucet was not the same as the water for drinking. Confused, Joe asked a hospital staff member if there was any plain water available, to which the staff member responded with astonishment, "Do you mean the water in the bathroom?" Joe was baffled by this response. Feeling unwell, Joe decided to queue up for medical treatment, thinking that his discomfort might be due to the long duration he spent inside the testing device. Before seeing a doctor, however, hospital staff examined the patients. They handed Joe a metal rod and told him to put it in his mouth and behind his ear and buttocks. The staff member forgot which wire should go where. When the time came for Joe to meet with the doctor seemed clueless and just laughed. After this encounter, Joe stumbled upon some literature on a table and realized that he had ended up in the year 2005, having slept for over 500 years. This revelation shocked Joe, and he looked out the window to see that the world he was in now was drastically different from the one he had left behind. Society had deteriorated to a state of crisis. Joe's lack of an ID and refusal to pay the hospital bill created suspicion that he might be an outsider who had surreptitiously entered the city, prompting the police to sound an immediate alert. After Joe saw this, he quickly slipped out of the hospital. And as evening approached, Joe grew hungry. Desperate for food, Joe attempted to buy some from a food vending machine. The police happened to pass by at that moment and noticed that Joe had no identification mark on his wrist, something every person was supposed to have in this era. This led to Joe's immediate arrest by the police. He was detained on charges of refusing to pay the hospital bill and not having the required identification mark. He was taken to court, where a lawyer was appointed to represent Joe. However, instead of helping Joe to prove his innocence, The lawyer made his case worse. The court ruled that Joe should be imprisoned, leaving him utterly confused. Returning to Rita, the woman who had undergone the same experiment, she woke up as well. She, too, had no idea that over 500 years had passed. Before Joe was sent to prison, he had to undergo an IQ test. This test was simple, involving placing objects in various shaped holes. However, no one else in this era could pass this test, revealing the widespread lack of intelligence in the world. Joe devised a clever plan to escape from prison, involving going to the warden and falsely claiming that he had to be released that day. He made the warden believe that he was scheduled to be released. The warden ordered another guard to open the prison door, and Joe quickly walked out, leaving the guard bewildered. Joe then tried to seek help from a house nearby, which belonged to a lawyer. This lawyer's name was Fido, the same person who had represented Joe in court. Joe begged Fido for help and threatened to report him if he didn't assist because Fido had unintentionally caused Joe's imprisonment. Fido became frightened and listened to Joe's plea. Joe explained that he needed to go back in time to the era he came from and that there was a time machine that could make it happen. However, Fido mentioned that the time machine was expensive as it had been invented by intelligent people a long time ago. Joe requested Fido's help in finding this time machine. Fido, feeling obligated but still disagreed to assist. Joe decided to propose an offer to Fido. If Fido helped him travel back in time, Joe would deposit money in a bank under Fido's name. In 500 years, the money would accumulate to billions due to interest. However, Fido informed Joe that the time machine cost over $20 billion. Joe then cleverly negotiated, Joe will increase the money to $30 billion. Fido calculated the math, but Fido still cannot figure out how much the profit, and Joe said the amount of money, $30 billion deducted by $20 billion, would be $8 billion left in account after paying for the time machine. Fido reluctantly agreed and decided to help Joe. Before their journey, Joe and Fido had to find Rita. They searched tirelessly until they finally found her. Joe quickly took Rita with them and explained the situation. Joe and Rita were now in the future, 500 years ahead. However, Joe assured them that Fido was going to help them find a time machine to return to their time. However, as they were about to leave, the police, aware that Joe had escaped from prison, caught up with them. All three decided to abandon Fido's car and instead commandeered a police car, making their escape. Fido led them to a city where there was a plane waiting to take them to the time machine. While waiting, Rita needed to use the restroom. As Joe and Fido waited for her, the police found Joe again. This time, Joe cooperated with the police, but instead of being taken back to prison, he was brought to the White House. The reason for this was that during the IQ test, Joe scored the highest in history, which made the authorities extremely interested in him. In fact, he was now considered the smartest person in the world, surpassing even the political leaders. He was appointed to be the minister of the country. At a national assembly, the president addressed the issues facing the nation, including widespread hunger and other challenges. However, he assured everyone that there was no need to worry because they had appointed a new cabinet to help govern the country. The new Minister of Intelligence was none other than Joe himself. The president proclaimed that Joe had the highest IQ in the world, which made him the smartest person on the planet. Thus, Joe was tasked with solving all the nation's problems. The president explained that he was too foolish to address these issues himself, and Joe promised to tackle every problem within 1 week. The citizens were thrilled with this news, but if Joe failed, he would return to prison. This newfound responsibility weighed heavily on Joe, as he knew he had no experience in governance. However, the president encouraged him to proceed, promising that if he succeeded, Joe would be rewarded. Joe then requested the police to bring Fido to him. Fido arrived and helped Joe chart a path to the time machine, as it is the way to escape. Next, Joe asks everyone to help find Rita, promising that if they do, Rita would be helpful. The leaders took Joe to view an agricultural field to address issues with crop growth. However, Joe had no knowledge in this area, so he spoke randomly and aimlessly to buy some more time. Finally, they found Rita, and Joe asked to discuss the problems with her privately. Of course, Joe discusses their escape. Unfortunately, Fido had prepared the directions to the time machine, but when they opened the instructions, It turned out to be indecipherable, like a little child drawing. With no other options, Joe had to return to his role as minister. While Joe and Rita were conversing, they discovered a large brewery on a farm that was watering the plants and crops with a giant bottle of a beverage known as energy drink. This company had also acquired all other businesses and dominated the market. They advertised that the energy drink was more beneficial than plain water in all dimensions. Joe realized the issue with the trees not growing was due to everyone using energy drink instead of regular water. However, it seemed that no one would believe how pouring plain water into the field would help the trees grow. When various explanations failed to convince the people, Joe devises a new clever plan. He told everyone that he could communicate with the trees, and they had told him that they needed plain water. This convinced the people to use plain water to water the trees, hoping for faster growth. With only 7 days to resolve all these issues, Joe had to act swiftly. A large group of people protested in front of the White House, expressing their disagreement with Joe's advice to use plain water. This caused the stock of the energy drink company to fall to zero, leading half of the population to massive job losses and subsequent demonstrations. The protesters blamed Joe for this crisis. This situation further deteriorated their economy, and Joe was arrested and accused of causing the economic collapse of the country. Joe instructed Rita to hurry and find Fido. She was also directed to tell Fido to bring her to the time machine to travel back alone. Joe encouraged Rita to tell everyone to keep reading and advised them to focus on learning. He emphasized that their world could be different if they made an effort. While Rita and Fido watched the live broadcast, she noticed a small tree that had just started growing. She shared this revelation with everyone, affirming that Joe's advice was accurate, and now all the trees were growing. Back with Joe, who was driving to escape and save himself, Rita managed to reach him and attempted to inform the president. However, the president doesn't believe her and thought she was lying to help Joe. On the racetrack, Joe found a way to outsmart his competitors by manipulating them into crashing into each other, causing an explosion. But the competition was far from over. Joe had to face another opponent. Rita decided to take matters into her own hands. She bribed a cameraman who was broadcasting the race live and instructed Fido to take the camera to the agricultural field. Simultaneously, Joe thought quickly and managed to grab a microphone. He tried to explain to everyone that he had only good intentions. He emphasized that if everyone used plain water to water the trees, they would definitely grow. However, the people who lacked intelligence didn't pay much attention to what Joe was saying. They simply wanted to see Joe being dealt with. While Joe was in dire straits, Rita and the cameraman arrived at the agricultural field. Rita hurriedly broadcasted the live images of the tree's growth. When the president saw this, he rushed to help Joe and declared that he would pardon him, as promised. People were relieved and happy when they realized that Joe's words were true. On that day, everyone celebrated lavishly. From now on, they wouldn't have to worry about hunger. While everyone was having fun at the celebration, Joe went to thank Rita for saving his life. He told her that after the event, he would have Fido take them back to the time machine. However, Rita informed Joe that she wouldn't be returning with him because she wanted to start a new life there. In the meantime, Joe was appointed as the new vice president. But Joe couldn't accept the position because he wanted to travel back to the past. However, the people insisted that he stay because there were still many problems they couldn't solve without him. Joe realized that these people genuinely needed his help. He also understood that leaving them would mean their demise. These people lack intelligence, and there is no way to keep humanity alive. In the end, Joe reluctantly decided to stay with everyone. Soon after, Joe found out the truth about the time machine mentioned by Fido. It wasn't an actual time machine as Joe had thought, but merely just a type of amusement park attraction. After serving as vice president for a short period, Joe was elected as the President of the United States. Fido became the vice president, and Rita was also chosen as First Lady. Joe encouraged everyone to read books because there was nothing to be ashamed of in doing so. He elevated the standards of education and fostered a renewed interest in learning among all the citizens. Several years later, Joe and Rita had children together. Their children became the smartest in the world. In contrast, Fido had 8 wives and a total of 32 children who turned out to be the least intelligent in the world. Though Joe might not have been the smartest compared to the people he came from, he felt an immense pride in using his knowledge to help everyone in a world 500 years ahead.